When we started, we had 10 students. Last week, we had 142. And last year, we saw over 300 first time visitors at our programs. None of this happened because of hype or excitement. It happened because our weekly rhythms established and cultivated an environment of growth. And in this video, I'm going to walk through every single step of our weekly programming so you can take what works and make it your own. When I started in this position 7 years ago, we had about 8 to 10 students a week. And I don't want to gloss over that because praise God for those 8 to 10 students. God used that time to do a mighty work in their lives. And it wasn't about how many, because we were fully invested in those 8 to 10. But over time, as we continued to plant and water, God gave an increase. And so now we serve about 140 plus students on a weekly basis. And each program runs over about 100 students a week. So we've grown numerically. We've seen 140 students the last week. We've seen over 300 first time visitors last year, and that number keeps growing this year. But we've also grown spiritually. Last year, our students shared the gospel over 4,400 times with their peers, family members, teammates, coaches, coworkers, you name it. And out of those 4,400 gospel conversations, we saw over 103 individuals trust Christ. And so God has continued to pour out a blessing upon this youth ministry, not because of who we are, but because of who He is. And so whenever we approach programming, we need to understand that our programs are simply a means to an end. You see, oftentimes youth pastors and youth leaders will ask this question: hey, what's the best program? Hey, what's the best strategy you found? Hey, is there a silver bullet that works or a magic formula? What have you found works for you? But see, when we kind of approach programs that way, we're actually asking the wrong questions and we're actually putting programs on a pedestal where they really don't belong. You see, whenever we look at youth ministry, there's four aspects that need to be right in order for it to work: gospel urgency, gospel fluency, gospel philosophy, and gospel strategy. You see, gospel urgency is a desire to share the gospel, is a desire to make disciples. And that's where we have to start, right? We have to really be about the Father's business and have a desire to do that. Then we move into gospel fluency. Hey, how do we actually do that out loud with words? Are our students trained? Are they equipped? Are they challenged to do that? Then we move to gospel philosophy. And these are the elements that will never change, no matter how long we're in youth ministry, no matter where we're in youth ministry, no matter the context of our youth ministry. This will never change. Our gospel philosophy, we use Dare to Share's 7 values of a gospel advancing ministry. I highly recommend you check that out. Their book, Gospelize, Gospelize, walks through all of this. And we get nothing from them for recommending that. And in fact, you can even download that for free on their website if you haven't already. But then we finally get to gospel strategy. And see, the mistake that a lot of people make is they put gospel strategy at the top. Hey, when are we going to meet? What are we going to do? And then how do we make this work? But see, the inverse is actually true. Who are we? What are we about? Hey, what's the best way to accomplish that? And so our programs don't define our ministry. They're not the driver of growth. If they are, then we're actually doing it wrong. Our program should simply be an environment that cultivates growth that the other three priorities drive. And so if we make the mistake of putting programs at the top of the food chain, then we've got a problem here. You see, our programs just simply reflect our priorities. We know that if we say we're about something, it will show up in our programs, but our programs don't define or determine our priorities. And so whenever we talk about programs, we need to make sure that we put them in the right position in order where they belong. And so whenever we approach our programs, we need to say, hey, how is this going to help us strategically accomplish what we're setting out to do? And so in our youth ministry, when we look at our programs, we have a couple simple program goals. The first of which is we want them to be evangelistic and discipleship to happen. See, some people say, well, this is really our outreach night and this is our core morning or core program. Hey, these are our core students and this is when we open the doors wide to everybody. Now, I'm not saying there's anything biblically wrong with that, but what we found in our youth ministry is we found that actually we can do both every time we meet as long as it's done well. Now, that doesn't mean every single context we meet in, right? I don't really want evangelism to be the goal of my student leadership team in terms of when we meet together. Hopefully, the students already have a relationship with Jesus. But in our weekly programs, we found that, hey, we want every single time we meet to have both evangelism and discipleship. Because what's your favorite wing on an airplane, right? Well, the trick question is you can't have a favorite wing on an airplane. You need both. And in our programs, we want both. So that way it is balanced and it works. And so each night has discipleship and evangelism present. Next, we want to create crossover between our programs. You see, I've talked to a lot of youth pastors and youth leaders, and they might be over one youth group, but the reality is they actually have a lot of individual youth groups. They have their Sunday morning youth group and their Wednesday night youth group and their Sunday night youth group. And they have these different pockets of students and they don't have any crossover. And so when you ask them a question of what's the context or health of your youth group, that might mean a different thing depending on which youth group we're actually really talking about. And so in our programs, one of our goals is to create crossover. We don't want silos within our youth ministry. And we can say that about 80%, at least 80% of our students attend both of our programs. Maybe not every week, but they're not just, hey, I only go to Sunday nights or I only go to Wednesday nights. That's only about 15 to 20% of our youth ministry. The reality is that most of our students attend both. And so we want to make sure that our programs work together, that it's not just this happens here and this happens here. No, we want to make sure that we're creating a regular rhythm where they're both working together to feed the growth that is happening, not to create it. Also, when we look at programs, we want to engage and force students to think and apply. One of the things that I see often is youth groups doing service, or excuse me, like youth services. Hey, this is our youth service, and then we have small groups. Now, again, nothing biblically wrong with doing a youth service. I don't have anything against it. But in our context, here's what we found. When we did a service model, when students would come and they'd sit, they'd worship and then receive and then leave, hey, there was no way for us to actually get feedback. There was nowhere for us to actually make sure that what we were saying was connecting with them. And so every single time we meet, we have an opportunity for students to engage in conversation to help us understand, hey, are they really getting it? Is what we're doing actually working? See, oftentimes when you preach and teach, you can do a great job, but students can say, yeah, I'm just kind of waiting this out until we get to the game. Or, yeah, I'm just kind of here for the game and now I got to sit through this. But when they actually have to think and respond critically, we can actually see whether or not what we're doing is making a difference. And so every single element of every single program we do has an element of student conversation where we're forcing them to think. And we'll talk more about that as we dive in. Lastly, when we look at our program objectives, we want this to be a time where we delegate influence. You see, when we meet in our programs, there's over 100 students and there's one of me. And what we want our programs to do is to be a place where they can connect with other leaders, maybe their small group leader, or maybe just another leader that, hey, because of similar interests or likes or personalities, they really seem to click with. We want them to have time with that leader. And so within our programs, we're always constantly looking for ways to make sure that students are around different leaders at different times. And so it's not just based on me. If I were to be wiped out tomorrow, that these programs could still operate and the ministry would go forward. And so, with that in mind, as we walk through the programs, I'm going to give you every single thing we do in the program. This is a deep dive, but here's what I want you to understand. You can take whatever works for you, but your culture, your context is different. And so we're going to look closer at the reason why we do things this way, not necessarily, hey, this is the best way to do things. But we want to go a layer deeper and say, hey, this is why we found this to work for us. And if you take that why, I know that it'll work for you, but the what might look a little bit differently. So we meet Wednesday nights, Sunday nights, and then I'll talk a little bit about what happens on Sunday mornings at the end. But starting off with Wednesday nights. Wednesday nights we meet 6:30 to 8:30. The reason why we start at 6:30 is because we want time for students to be able to have practice, eat dinner, and still make it to youth group in time. And we've strategically, as we'll talk about in a second, positioned our hangout time on the front side so that students can roll in. And so 8:30 is a little bit later for school night, but we've never had anybody say, hey, that's just too late for us. And so 6:30 to 8:30 is the sweet spot for us where we're at. I don't know where it is for you, but we found that to work for us. And so with our program from about 6:20 to really about 6:45, students are rolling in. And so we have our check-in from 6:20 to 6:45. Now we don't close check-in at 6:45. If a student comes right from a game in their dirty uniform and they roll in at 7:15, hey, we want them there. But from 6:20 to 6:45 is really when our check-in station is going full bore. And there's a couple of notes here that often get glossed over when it comes to check-in. Check-in is a huge piece of our ministry because it helps us with our back-end systems to really care for students. If we have check-in right, we can have a lot of systems running. But if we don't have check-in right, now all of a sudden we don't really know who's been here, and now I'm relying on my memory, or hey, I don't know, have you seen this student? Hey, what's going on here? But when we have check-in data correct, now we can actually reach out and say, hey, we noticed that you missed the last two youth groups. Is everything going okay? Hey, we missed you. We'd love for you to come back. And so check-in data is critical. And because of that, here's one thing that we learned. We want check-in to be the first thing they see when they walk in the doors of our church. I know a lot of youth groups where maybe their youth room is in the back, and so they have check-in in the back near their youth station. And so students walk in and they walk down the hallway and they finally get to their youth room and now check-in. Hey, we want check-in to be the first thing they see when they walk in the doors of our church for two reasons. Number one, it helps to make sure everybody checks in. If my youth room's in the back and there's multiple points of entry, right? I can have kids coming in different ways. Hey, we want check-in to be the first thing they see so we can make sure the check-in data is accurate. Secondly, this helps us to craft a first impression, right? If they walk in and they spend 30 seconds to a minute walking back to our youth room, hey, then that's kind of an aimless wander. But if we have check in right up front, we get to control that first impression to the best of our ability to really set the tone for what we're all about. And so from 6:20, 6:45, we have check in, but there's multiple things going on. So we have check in stations where our current students go up to the iPads and they check in. First timers, they go to a leader, and a leader is sitting there with a first timer card, and they, hey, what's your name? Hey, where do you go to school? Right. And 99% of our first timers come with a friend. We do occasionally, but very rarely have a student wander in on their own. And so most of the time they're already with a friend. And so we don't have to do too much connecting, but sometimes we do. But as they fill out that visitor card, then we have a first timer gift for them. And we've talked about this on the podcast before, but we found the best first timer gift in our context is a custom lanyard. We create a custom lanyard with Romans 10, 9 through 15, the verse reference on it, because that's kind of what we're about as a youth group. And then on that lanyard, we have some custom gifts like custom bracelets, custom stickers, a free snack at our Todd's Place snack shop. We have a social media card where they can scan and follow us on social media. And then we have, if we have a winter retreat coming up, the flyer for that on there. But then the most important card is we have a card that on the front says, hey, here's when we meet. And it helps them scan the QR code to join our communication group if they want to do that. But on the back, it says, here's what we believe. And so when that first timer checks in, hey, a leader or oftentimes their friend who brought them will walk through the what we believe portion. And they'll walk through the life in 6 words gospel acrostic from Dare to Share as they walk them back to our youth group. And so that student who comes in for the very first time, the first thing they hear is what we're all about, what we believe. And that might be new to them, or they might have heard that 1,000 times, but they know that it's what we believe very simply. So they walk in, check in, first timers get that lanyard. There's still other stuff going on at our check in station. That's where we have our cross with ping pong balls. And this is how we track gospel conversations and salvations. You see, when students walk in the doors, the cross is in front of our check in stations. And if they had a gospel conversation with somebody that week, they take a white ping pong ball and they drop it in there. If they had a gospel conversation with somebody who trusted Christ, hey, they drop a white one in representing the conversation, and then they drop an orange one in that represents a salvation. And at the end of the month, I dump that cross out, count them up, we celebrate those, and we start with the next month. And so in that check-in time is also where we're tracking multiple metrics like gospel conversations, salvations, first timers, and the check-in and attendance data. Also, we have another leader who's stationed there, and their job is to say, hey, do you know the verse of the week? You see, every Wednesday night, we assign him a verse to learn for the next night because we know that scripture memory and memorization is often kind of the last spiritual discipline involved in youth ministry, and we don't want it to be that way. Now, we don't have endless time throughout our program, and so we use that check-in time, and we actually have a little prize box where, hey, if they know the verse of the week, then they get a piece of candy or a little fidget spinner, whatever it is, right? They get a prize for that. And so there's a lot going on at check-in. And then lastly, as they round the corner after check-in, we have a station set up. That's normally where I'm at. and we have a cart of Bibles. And once they're walking back, we see them getting the gospel shared with them with the lanyard so we can easily identify who's a first timer. And I just ask them a question. Hey, do you have a Bible at home that you like and you use? And oftentimes they'll be like, oh, yeah, I do, but I didn't bring it with me. I'm sorry. It's like, no, no, no. Hey, no, no, no. We just want to give you one if you don't have one. And so if they don't have one, they get to pick out their Bible right then and there with their friend. And it's a great way because then when we go into our program, they already have a Bible. They feel like they belong. And what we found actually is that the students who received a Bible from us are actually more likely to bring them to our programs than students who maybe just have always had a Bible because they connect, hey, this place is about the Word of God, and so I need to have this with me when I'm here. So that's check-in from 6:20 to 6:30, but our program starts at 6:30, so sometimes it rolls on. But then from 6:30 to 7:05, we have free time and hangout time. Now, for our free time and hangout time, we're lucky and blessed to have a full-size gym, and it makes things so much easier. And in fact, our youth room overlooks our gym. And so we have a youth room that overlooks our gym, and so everybody's right there in one central location. And so I'll tell you kind of what we do, but then I'll tell you the reason behind it. So we have free time and hangout time, and some students are just sitting up in our youth room talking. Many of them are in the gym playing gaga ball, nine square, passing a volleyball, shooting hoops, throwing a football. Now, we upgraded to gaga ball and nine square because as students continued to grow, it got crazier and crazier and crazier in the gym. And so why we love gaga ball and nine square is because the goal of the game is to actually keep the ball in the game. And so that's really helped us with crowds. And so we have that going on, but the real reason is the why behind it. You see, we use hangout time as an opportunity to really connect with that first timer. You see, I might circle back to them and say, hey, do you go to church anywhere or not really? Do you know what you believe about God yet? Or are you still figuring that out? We use that as a time to have that intentional conversation with that student. And our leaders know that, hey, they are cleared hot for this time. If they need to talk to a student about an issue that the student has been working through, this is the time to talk to them about it. If they need to talk to a student about a behavioral problem, this is the time to talk to a student about it. If they need to talk to a student and just follow up on a situation that's going on, to encourage them to celebrate something in their lives, this is the time to do that. If there's a new student there, this is the time to do that. And so this is really an opportunity every single week built into our programs for us to be having those intentional conversations because once the large group and small groups and that time gets started, we know that that's difficult to have. And so that hangout time offers a huge opportunity for us. Not only that, our leaders are not standing around talking to other leaders. Our leaders are playing the games with the students, hanging out with the students, talking with the students. And so now, if I'm a first timer, guess what? I've already just spent 35 minutes with my small group leader playing gaga ball, nine square, basketball, sitting around talking, playing cards, playing checkers, whatever it is. And so it helps that relationships build because women build relationships face to face and men build relationships side by side. So specifically for those guys, it helps them kind of feel a part of something before we ever even get in to the biblical side of things outside of the gospel and giving them their Bibles. And so this isn't a time for us to have those intentional conversations, a time for our leaders to spend time with students. And then not only that, this gives us an ability to have a quick transition into our large group. Because what I've found is we're always pressed for time in programs, but when we can hasten the transitions, that's when we pick up crucial minutes. So from 6:30 to 7:05 is our free time. Students are rolling in. At 7:05, we make this transition as quickly as possible to our large group. Now, we used to meet in our youth room. Well, we have multiple youth rooms. We have our hangout room, and then we used to meet kind of in our main room that was kind of built for youth and large kids ministry and all those things. But the good problem is that we outgrew it. And so recently our church invested in bleachers. And so now we have retractable bleachers in our gym. And so for us, we want to make that transition time as quickly as possible. So everybody helps with the cleanup. The bleachers are already out and students simply go sit in the bleachers for our large group time. Now, depending on your building, depending on your meeting context, that transition is going to look a lot different, right? But for us, we found that, hey, when we can hasten that transition, we can really make a difference. So 6:30, 7:05, hangout time. 7:05 to 7:50 is the goal. Normally, I'm closer to 7:55, is our large group time. Now, something maybe a little unique about our ministry is that we actually don't have praise and worship in our youth gatherings. Now, we're not against it. Occasionally, we'll have praise nights when our youth band will lead, but we actually opted not to have worship at our youth nights, and here's actually why. because we tell them, hey, we don't want to create a youth service. We see Sunday morning as our praise and worship service, and we want to invite you into that. Now, if you have worship in your youth ministry, go for it. Praise God, not against it. What I found for our culture and our context is that oftentimes, hey, students will just say, oh, I went to church at youth group, so Sunday morning isn't really important. And so, what we found is having that worship service Sunday morning that we invite them to, it really helps them to get connected to the church as a whole, not just our youth group. So we go right into our large group. And of course, that looks like announcements, but then we actually do something a little bit different. We walk through the gospel at the beginning of our lesson every single time. In fact, we have the 6 sentences of the gospel acrostic life in 6 words up on the screen, and I'll just say the first letter or word, hey, God, and all of them in unison will say, created us to be with him. I'll say R. They'll say sin separate us from God. And then I might advance to the next slide or go back so they can't read off the screen anymore. Hey, and I'll say sins. And they'll say can't be removed by good deeds. Paying the price for our sins, Jesus died and rose again. Everyone who trusts in him alone has eternal life. Life with Jesus starts now and lasts forever. And then I'll go back to that screen and I'll introduce that again for our first timers. So now they've heard it for a second time, but from a different person. And for those students who already have trusted Christ, now they're hearing that over and over and over and over. And so it sticks. And when the time comes to actually share the gospel, they're ready to give a defense for the hope that is within them. And so we walk through that gospel piece every single time. And then we have prayer every single time. See, a lot of youth ministries will say we're about prayer, but here's what happens. I pray to open the service, and then I pray at the end. Maybe in small group, we take some prayer requests. But the reality is that we're not actually teaching them how to pray. And so what we do is what we've done in the past is something called tacos: thanksgiving, adoration, confession, others, and self. And so we'll help them walk through a prayer, maybe out loud with words. We might do a fill in the blank prayer, or we might do it silently. And I can use that prayer time to help them reflect on different things, to really prepare their hearts and minds for what we're about to talk about. And so it's a time of recentering. We spend about 3 to 5 minutes in prayer before we go to the lesson. And we found this does a couple things. Number one, it introduces students to prayer. Number two, it can be a time for me to really help them reflect and see what's going on in their lives. And number three, it helps them to kind of settle in for the real reason we're there. After that, we jump right into the lesson. We waste no time. We jump right into the lesson and we walk through our lesson. We do a mix of topical and book studies. I know people have strong opinions on that. Hey, as long as we're allowing the word to do the work, that's what we're about. And so we have our large group lesson. We walk through that. Every student has a physical Bible in hand, hopefully the one they brought that's theirs from home, maybe the one they got for the first time that night. But we also have a class set of physical Bibles, but every student has a Bible in hand. So here's why: if a student has their phone out, I can tell them to put it away. And they can't say, well, I'm using the Bible app. Hey, the Bible app is great, but right here with a physical Bible, now it's me and you. And guess what? Students actually have to flip to the page. So I always start out with, hey, turn to this passage. And what we do is it helps students really flip through the Bible, get familiar with it. And we've seen friends helping their friend find the passage, and it kind of gives them some influence over them from a spiritual standpoint. And so we walk through our our large group lesson, and then at the end, we always have an invitation, no matter what it is. In fact, I remember one time we were teaching on the Levite's concubine in Judges. We were walking through the book of Judges, and we are looking at the Levite's concubine, which, if you're familiar with the story, is not exactly the story that they include in the children's Bible, is I guess how I'd put it lightly. And we had some first timers walk in. In fact, that night we had five. And I was like, man, I'm going to be talking about this tonight, God. Should I change something? I had something else in my back pocket. I was like, should I just change something? Maybe a little bit more, gospel centered, or something maybe a little bit easier for a first timer to understand. And I just felt the Holy Spirit just saying, nope, this is what I've preordained, and we're going to go with this. And so we walked through the Levite's concubine, and we looked at it as a picture of this is what sin does. This is where sin leads us. And at the end, we gave an invitation, and two of those five first timers trusted Christ that night. And they came up and shared that with me afterwards. And so we know that every single message needs to tie back to the gospel, because every single passage in scripture ties back to the gospel. And so at the end of every large group lesson, I give a twofold invitation. So, for instance, last night we finished up a series, Battle Lines, on spiritual warfare, and we were walking through Ephesians 6. And in the small group, or in the large group at the end, in that invitation, I asked two questions because we were talking about their safety with the king. I asked the first question, hey, whose side are you on? There's only two sides. Which side are you on? And I walked through the gospel and gave them an opportunity to respond right then and there. And I said, hey, if you made that decision to trust Christ, would you just raise your hand between me and you? They raise their hand. And then I say this, hey, afterwards, would you come up to me and give me a fist bump? If you come up and give me a fist bump, I'll know what that means and I have something for them. And when they come up and do that, they give me a fist bump. I say, hey, did you trust Christ tonight? And they'll say, yeah. I say, hey, that's awesome. We'll go over it again, make sure they understand. And then we give them our new believers booklet. And we say, hey, this will help you get started. It'll help you learn more about what the Bible is, how to pray, and give you some helpful resources and really get you started on your journey. So we'll do that invitation. They'll just raise their hand at that moment, and then I'll encourage them after I finish praying to come up to me and give me a fist bump. So I'll have that moment of response for them, and then I'll have the moment of response for the entire group. And last night it was, hey, are you staying close to the king? If you're on the king's side, are you staying close to the king? And I'll say, hey, if you've noticed you've strayed from God, you've gotten distant, would you raise your hand so I can pray for you? And so it's always a twofold invitation, and it really helps students, wherever they are, to know that this applies to them. Well, then we transition from large group to small groups, and small groups are the heartbeat of our ministry. One of our sayings at our church is, as we grow larger, we must grow smaller. Small groups are where they're known, where they can talk, where they can be held accountable, where they can ask for prayer. Small groups are the heartbeat of our ministry. And so they go into their small group rooms, and the first thing we start with is gospel accountability. We say this, hey, who'd you share the gospel with this past week, and how'd it go? And students share, hey, I shared with this person. How'd it go? It went really well. Or I don't know, they didn't seem too interested. But we encourage them, the good, bad, and the ugly. And so that's that opportunity for that accountability piece to be baked in. And if we get in there and we say, hey, who'd you share the gospel with this week and how'd it go? And nobody says anything, it's not a time to berate them. It's just a time to say, hey, guys, this is what we're working towards. And so I know that God gives us opportunities, and we just need to be faithful to take the opportunities that He gives us. And it's just a time to reflect and recenter on, hey, are we about the Father's business? So the first thing we always start with is, hey, who'd you share the gospel with and how'd it go? After that, we dive into the discussion guide. Now, here's something crucial. We make sure that our small group leaders feel empowered to take that discussion guide and do whatever they want with it. I make sure that I get it to them at least the day before, hopefully 2 days before, so that way they have time to go through it. And here's what I say: cross out questions, add your own questions. Hey, if you think this question could use a follow up question, put it in there. You have complete freedom. And the reason I love doing that is if a small group leader comes to me and says, hey, I just don't know if my students are connecting, I say, hey, that's great. Change it, make it your own, do whatever you want. Because I write discussion questions for sixth grade girls all the way up to 12th grade guys. They have very different discussion questions, they have very different questions in general. Hey, take it and make it your own. All of our small groups have different intricacies and rhythms. Some sit on the floor in a circle, some sit around tables, some circle in chairs. Some of them start with prayer requests. Some of them end with prayer requests. Some of them don't do prayer requests, but they do it through group chats. Some of them have group texts. Some of them have group me's. Some of them don't have anything, right? It's up for that leader to really individualize and contextualize what we're doing for those students. And so those small group discussion guides are moldable depending on what they need. And the second question, or the second piece I found to writing great discussion guides is make sure that it doesn't feel like a question and answer, like a study guide or a test that they're trying to ace. And so here's what we try not to do. Hey, what did Ryan talk about in large group? And what did he say about this? See, that's just regurgitation. The discussion questions we try and ask are application based. Hey, based on what we talked about, look at this passage. Based on this passage, how would you respond to this? Or what would you say, more importantly, what would the Bible say about this? And that's a skill that takes time, but that's one of the things that I feel like I've grown in over the past few years is making sure that I'm writing those discussion questions, not to feel like, hey, we're just trying to give you the answer you're looking for. And really, hey, this is an open ended discussion, but with biblical values. And so one of the things I try not to do is provide the answers for discussion questions. If I feel like this discussion question could use some examples, I'll put those. But the reality is that, hey, we try and make sure that those are open ended. But one of the other pieces we do is we try and make sure that they're always biblically based. And so it's not just they have their Bible open during large group. We're always making sure that during small group, we say, hey, read this passage. How would you respond? Hey, based on this passage, how would you respond? Or sometimes the things we're looking for are in biblical passage. And so we have students open to different passages. And it's really helpful. One of the things that Keith Group has done is instead of some students will be the one to say first, oh, I found it first, look at me. He's found that some students just stopped looking for it because they couldn't find it in time. And so what they do is they time how long it takes for every student to find the passage all together as a whole, and then they try and beat that each week. And so therefore that student who might know it and say first is now helping the student who might not know it, because as an aggregate they're working together to get there as quickly as possible. So in those small groups, we have that gospel accountability, and we have the discussion guide with free reign. And that's really where most of our ministry happens. That's where students are having those conversations. And here's what the cool part is. Every single night when the small groups dismiss at 8:30, I can see a student hanging back talking to a leader. And so that's also a time where the student can come up to that leader and say, "Hey, can I ask you a question? Can I talk to you about something? Hey, what about this?" And so that's really another time where leaders know, hey, this is when I'm approachable to students so they can come ask me a question or seek out advice. So we've talked about our Wednesday night program. Now we have our Sunday night program. Our Sunday night program meets from 6:30 to 8. Ideally, I'd love for it to be 6:30 to 8:30, but after 2 morning services, 2 hours at night can be pretty long. And so it's just 6:30 to 8. And while Wednesday night is kind of our main engine, Sunday night is kind of the bridge that helps us complete those rhythms. And so Sunday night looks very different than Wednesday nights, but here's the beauty of it. It's the same leaders and the same students. You see, our youth leaders agree to serve on Wednesday night and Sunday nights. Part of making sure that we don't have siloed youth ministries within one youth ministry is making sure that most of our leaders serve both nights. Now, again, there's nothing wrong with having a leader who can only serve Wednesday night or Sunday night. But what we found is having that consistency across the board, make sure that students see, hey, the leaders are there both nights. Hey, maybe I should come both nights. Or, hey, my small group leader isn't here on Sunday nights, so I'm only going to come on Wednesday nights, or vice versa. And so having those leaders commit to Sunday night and Wednesday night provides that stability and that consistency that helps students to flourish. So from 6:30 to 8 o'clock, from 6:20 to 6:30, check in the same as Wednesday night. They're walking up, they're checking in, first timers, lanyards, recording gospel conversations. The only thing we don't do is the memory verse, because the memory verse is attached to that Wednesday night study we're working through. Sunday nights, they come in and they go directly to rooms by grade. Now, why do we do that? Well, we used to do a large group lesson on Sunday night, but because of the time crunch, here's what would happen. We'd have a large group lesson, and then we'd have a large group game. And there was never a time to really force students to think and to respond from a biblical standpoint. They didn't really have to do any application. Sure, we did observation, interpretation, and we gave them application, but they weren't forced to do it on their own. And so we've shifted that to Sunday nights being a completely different environment than Wednesday nights. So think about this. Wednesday nights, they're in a large group with everybody, and then they're in a small group by grade and gender. So 6th grade boys, 8th grade girls, right? Sunday nights, they're with their grade. 6th grade boys and girls together. In fact, we do our 6th and 7th grade guys and girls all together. They're in a little bit of a larger group because it actually helps us rather than splitting them off and making those smaller groups that can sometimes be a little bit more unruly because they get comfortable. But our 8th grade guys and girls together, our 9th grade guys and girls together, our 10th grade guys and girls together, and then our 11th and 12th grade guys and girls are together to kind of provide that accountability of, hey, they're getting ready to graduate, so they're pouring into that next class. And so here's what we do. They walk into that room, and their small group leaders from Wednesday nights will be the ones in that room with them. So the 10th grade girls leader and the 10th grade guys leaders, they're both together with all the 10th graders. And here's what we love. It's a different environment. It's not my same small group that meets on Wednesday nights. It's not a large group where I just come and sit down. Hey, there's a different environment, a different dynamic. Now this kind of resembles more like a school lunch table or a class or an after school program, right? Or a friend group. And so it helps them get comfortable with talking with a mixed gender setting. In fact, one of our small group leaders approached me and said, "Hey, our girls have just mentioned that they're a little uncomfortable with the guys being in there. They don't like to talk as much." And I said, "Hey, I'm so glad you brought that to me." And they were bringing it to me from a, "Hey, what should I do?" And I said, "Well, think about the girls in that group." And we started thinking about it. We started listing off the relationships they had with their dads. And we found that none of them had really great relationships outside of one. And so for them, it was a place where they could really, hey, this is what it's like to interact with godly men, right? A godly male leader. They might get used to me preaching and teaching, but This is another male leader in their life that can have a healthy, right, with boundaries in place, relationship with them, and they can model that for them. And so this does a lot of different things. It provides a different dynamic. But what we actually do on Sunday nights is one of my favorite things. We do something called TikTok theology, and it's our students' favorite thing we do. So what this looks like is throughout the week, I put together a video. I put it on a USB, and then every room has a TV, and I stick that USB in the TV, and I get it queued up. So when the leader walks in, they just have to hit play. I'll send them the video ahead of time so they can walk through what we're going to be talking about so they can come prepared, but they don't have to teach. It's all right there on video. So here's what happens. They hit play on that video at 6:45. So from 6:30 to 6:45, students are just coming in the room, settling in. 6:45, they hit play. We walk through announcements. We walk through a challenge. So on Sunday night, it's a little bit different than Wednesday nights. We have a challenge. Hey, text 3 friends and ask this question. Hey, have you ever read the Bible? Hey, text 5 friends and say, hey, how can I be praying for you? If they don't have a phone, we say, just pray for them right there. But there's that challenge that activates that faith. And then we say, hey, pause this video and walk through the gospel and prayer. So they'll walk through that gospel acrostic, they'll spend time in prayer, and they hit play on that video. And here's what TikTok theology is. What we do is we find clips on social media, YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, and we play them for students. So these are real clips out in the wild, as we like to say, that they watch. And here's what they have to do. They have to respond to them from a biblical standpoint. And so it's meant to mirror this. Hey, what do you do if your friend at the lunch table says this? What do you do if you're engaged in a spiritual conversation and somebody says this? Hey, what do you do if you're at Thanksgiving dinner and somebody says this? How would you respond on the spot? And so what I do is I say, hey, tonight we're going to be doing this. So I'll give you, for instance, last week, we walked through a video of a debate where one person is bringing up, hey, homosexuality and why the Bible stance on homosexuality is outdated or just flat out wrong. And so he brings up some different arguments to use for that. And he's getting ready to, or he's sharing that with somebody who's actually in a debate, but you can find all different types of clips. And what we do is we say, hey, tonight you're going to watch this video. I don't tell them what it's about, but I normally play it twice and I stitch that into the video. And they watch this video. And then here's what I do. I come back on the video and I just summarize. Hey, so here's what they said. Take some time and I want you to summarize their argument and talk about how you would biblically respond. The leader pauses that video and here's what happens. They turn to the students and they say, how would you respond? Here's a critical piece I found. When we do something like this, students engage for multiple reasons. Number one, it's not us presenting that argument. So it's not us putting up the ball on the tee for them to knock it out of the park. No, it's actually somebody who's not in good faith making this argument. Or maybe they're in good faith, but they're in a good faith standpoint from an incorrect position. And so it causes students to actually have to think, this is a real person who believes this, who's saying this, who thinks this, who's asking this question. And so it helps them to respond to that. Secondly, they're not talking about themselves in this group. We found when they talk about themselves in those groups, the conversation isn't great. They're talking about ideas, and that helps them to be more open and honest because they're not sharing their life story in front of 20 students. They're talking about an idea, and they bounce off each other. And we tell the leaders, hey, you can break them up even into smaller groups in here. You can do it all as one big group. But what this allows us to do is to talk about a ton of different topics, but it still kind of fits because it's one long series, TikTok theology. So they come together and we always drive them to the Bible. They summarize the argument and then how would you biblically respond? They take time to talk about that and then the leader will hit play and I'll give my response. And it does so many different things. One, it makes them think, right? They have to actually think how they would respond. Even if they're not talking, they have to think about it. Secondly, they have to actually look for what the Bible says. Hey, if you say what you think, that's great, but how would you support that from Scripture? And number three, again, it allows us to hit on all the hot button topics and issues, but saying this is a real argument out there in the real world. Now, one of the tips I found for finding good videos is actually going to solid accounts like Wes Huff or Red Pen Logic or all these different things, and they'll actually do this for you, right? They'll find the videos and then they'll respond to them, and sometimes you can even just play their response. But sometimes I even slip in solid theology videos to make sure that they're actually listening and not just looking to poke holes in things, that they might say, hey, actually, that is solid, and here's why. And so we do that, and then at the end of the video, we give an invitation. We connect it to the gospel and we provide an invitation. And students love it. Sometimes they'll go way over the time because they just like talking about it. And now they're not rushed to get to the game because these are topics that they're interested in. So from 6:45 to 7:25, we do TikTok theology. If you want to see really what that's like, drop us a comment or in our youth ministry mastermind, just go ahead and say, "Hey, Ryan, can you send me a YouTube video?" We have them on our youth page, but they're unlisted because we add our videos on there. But I can shoot that to you and you can check that out. Everybody who's tried it has loved it. So 7:25, they transition into our games. And we try and do large group games from 7:25 to 8 o'clock. So it's a little bit different, but we still provide a hangout option. I used to say, hey, everybody needs to participate in the games, but I found recently it's like, hey, we'll just give you a place to hang out, but as long as there's a leader there and it's controlled, it goes well. So large group games, dodgeball, basketball, volleyball, all church games like Gargon, kick the can, capture the flag, or maybe different games like trivia, stage games, head, knees, shoulders, cup, right? Australian musical chairs, medieval musical chairs. But it's a way that we're constantly cycling through and rotating games, but we give them multiple options. And we found that really helps because then they get to pick which one they actually want. And then at the end, everybody goes home. Students with questions will hang back. Never fails. So that's Sunday night. We've walked through Wednesday night, Sunday night. Now, what do we do for events and retreats? Well, here's a lesson I learned the hard way. I used to try and do events on Friday nights, Saturday nights. Now, whenever we do a big event, it only lives on Sunday nights. And here's why. They're already used to coming to youth group. Attendance is always so much better for us on a Sunday night. So a few weeks ago, we did our neon night, silent disco, and neon dodgeball, and we had 170 students. And it's so simple because guess what? I'm not asking our youth leaders to give up another night of the week. If we have a big event, I just extend the time. I have a registration ahead of time so everybody knows time's going to go a little bit overboard. And we went 6:30 to 9, and it works perfectly. We can pick when they don't have school the next day, or even if they do, it's not that big of a deal. But we do our big events on Sunday nights, and it makes it super easy. We're not asking youth leaders to come out another night, and they're already in the rhythm. And here's another piece that I hadn't really thought about till somebody else mentioned it. A lot of big churches or bigger youth groups, or sometimes even smaller youth groups, can fall prey to this. Is when they start to do all these events, here's what happens. They're actually taking away the time that their students can be in the community to actually evangelize and disciple their friends. And so, one of the ways that we try and do it is we try not to add a third night of the week or another event throughout the week because we want to make sure that they have time to go to football games, to go to these events, to go to these things, because that's when they have gospel opportunities. And so that's one thing that we found that's worked well for us. It's their regular rhythm. We don't overcrowd the schedule. That's when our large group happen. And then we encourage our small groups to have small group events once a quarter. So they might go ice skating. They might meet up for ice cream. They might do a movie night. And they can combine small groups. That's up to our leader's discretion. But I say, hey, I'll provide everything you need. Just let me know. And so it's not advertised the entire youth ministry. It's just that small group. And it kind of breaks up that rhythm. We do summer camp once a year, of course, in summer, middle school and high school together. We do winter retreat, middle school weekend, and high school weekend, so it gives that separate time. And then we do an international mission trip every year. We jam the international mission trip into the summer, and it's very tight, but it works for us right now. And so those are kind of our events and retreats. Now, you might notice I didn't mention anything about Sunday mornings. And that's because we actually don't have Sunday morning programming at our church for middle or high school students. We used to, but we found that it actually didn't work really well for us. And here's why. We had a lot of students there who never engaged in youth group throughout the week. And so that didn't mean that it was bad, but here's what it simply meant is that they thought, hey, I come Sunday mornings, I go to a service, I go to the youth class, and then I'm good for next Sunday. And what we wanted to do is to help them see that this isn't just a class to attend. This is a group to be a part of because we're about something. Our programs don't drive us. Our mission drives us. And so for us, the right opportunity, the right change was to say, hey, we're going to transition Sunday morning programming. And our goal for every student is to worship one, serve one. What do we mean by that? Well, we want them to worship, to attend a service and worship. And then we hope that the other service they'll serve. And so if you were to walk into our kids ministry on a Sunday morning, about 50% and sometimes over 50% of our volunteers are actually students. Now, they're vetted, they're trained, they're held to the same accountability and standard, but they know what they're doing and they're actively serving. And here's the beauty of it: they're serving alongside other adults in the church. And so they're continuing to cultivate those relationships. So when they graduate, it's not just the class they graduated with and the youth leaders. Now they already have connections throughout the whole church. They might serve in kids' ministry, they might be serving in the cafe, they might serve on the worship team if they're particularly talented. They might help out. We have a couple students who are literally our kids' directors' assistants on Sunday mornings, and they might be their runners to go get supplies or grab things off the copier. But they worship one, serve one. And the reason why we love them worshiping together is that it helps them get in the regular rhythm and routine. So when they graduate, it's not, hey, what does a Sunday morning service look like? And they're actually engaged in the Sunday morning worship service. And so we see Sunday morning as for them, and they do too, but it helps them really get connected. And we found that to be a great rhythm for our church. Might not be for your church, that's okay. But for our church, it's great. Now, you might say, well, Ron, what about the parents? What do they say? Where's the place for their kid? Hey, the place for their kid is worshiping alongside of them. We encourage them to do that. And in fact, we really haven't gotten much negative feedback at all about that. Is it possible that somebody might be looking specifically for Sunday morning programs for their kid? It's possible. And there's some great churches in our area that offer that. And we'd be happy to share that with them. But for us, in our context, we found this to be the best way to do it. So, regardless of when you meet or what that looks like, remember, your programs don't drive your youth ministry. They're an environment to cultivate what God is already doing. But your programs can really help you to do this well. And so if you have any questions, you can reach out to me, drop a comment below. If you found anything that works great for you, you can drop that below. But if you're looking to access any of the resources I mentioned, all of those are in our youth ministry mastermind. That's our free community for youth pastors and youth leaders. You can join today simply by going and clicking the description below. If you're wondering, hey, how do I actually know if my youth ministry is in a healthy spot? We did a video walking through the 5 metrics that every healthy youth ministry should track. And I'll attach that video here if you're watching on YouTube. You can go ahead and check that out. But let us know, but please like, share, subscribe so we continue to take the gospel to more students.